Hey everybody, welcome to the Blendr Report, where news meets rational thinking. I'm your host, Jonathan Harvey. This is your co-host, Liam DeBoer. Liam, what are we talking about today?
Today, we're going to be chatting about Trudeau's cabinet meltdown with Freeland's resignation sparking chaos, the fall economic update unveiling a $62 billion deficit, a whistleblower exposing CBSA corruption that endangers Canadian society, Canada's $102 billion slush fund, a black hole of corruption, COVID vaccine producers sharing over 1 million adverse effects reports with Health Canada, and Milei achieving Argentina's first budget surplus in over a century. All right, so first off, we've got Trudeau's cabinet meltdown, Freeland's resignation sparking chaos. Chrystia Freeland resigned as finance minister, exposing internal divisions in Trudeau's Liberal Party and highlighting Canada's dire financial state. Freeland criticized Trudeau's reckless spending, emphasizing the need to prepare for potential U.S. tariffs under Donald Trump. Following her resignation, Sean Fraser and other ministers also quit, leaving Dominic LeBlanc, a scandal-tainted former public safety minister, to manage Canada's finances. Meanwhile, NDP leader Jagmeet Singh hypocritically called for Trudeau's resignation, delaying action to secure his pension. Trudeau's leadership has driven Canada into chaos, with growing calls for his removal. So, how bad do you think things have to get before Trudeau resigns?
I've gone to this point that I just don't actually think he's going to anymore. It can't really get any worse for him. You know, whether it's your immigration problem, whether it's your economics blowing through the budget, whether it's having your, I think 5 cabinet ministers have quit this year alone. 67% of the group that was with him's already left him. You point at anything, housing, inflation, it doesn't really matter. He's managed to cock it up, right? Like he just has. And he's been asked to step down. Like I've never in my life, and I'm sure that it's happened, seen 24 sitting MPs asking their leader to step down. And he's like, nope, I got this under control. And they're all like, okay, yeah, no, we're all on the same page.
And 60% of the country too.
Yeah, it's that. And then you're also seeing after this, when you had Jagmeet Singh, so you had the leaders of all the parties, right? You had Jagmeet Singh, you had Blanchette from the Bloc, and you also obviously had Poilievre being like, what the hell are you doing here? He's been on his back for a couple of years now. None of it seems to sway him in any way. And what was interesting to me is seeing, you could tell me if you feel differently, but Freeland was a loyalist, like the most loyal. And for her to switch sides and kind of, in a very subtle way, throw him under the bus, I think it should be noted. People are like, oh, she did this, that, and it was such subtle language. You could tell she was upset, but she didn't say anything that would affect her chances of being continuing to be an MP or anything like that. So she didn't really throw him under the bus. But for her to back out and be like, no, you can fall on this sword. To me, that was, probably the biggest internal signal of there is a major problem here. And I don't know how he gets through this. Then he comes out a couple hours later and gives a speech like everything's great. And most of it's the Conservatives' fault, who haven't been in power for 10 years. So how bad do things have to get? Honestly, I think you have to see his own MPs vote against him in a non-confidence. So usually what happens in a non-confidence, it's called a whipped vote. And that's where the party leaders just say, here's how you're voting. This is what you're doing. And I think enough Liberal MPs, from what I'm seeing right now, and the reason I say this is because both the NDP and the Liberals are in such bad shape, you need both parties to vote for, or you need at least the NDP to vote for a non-confidence. But because the parties are doing so poorly in the polls, they need until October or whatever, all the time they have, they need, because they need to improve their brand equity for their party, right? So I think if you start seeing some MPs from the Liberals break this whipped vote strategy where the leaders tell them how to vote, you could actually see him get pushed out. But I don't think it would be a resignation. I honestly think he's going to go kicking and screaming.
Yeah, I agree. At this point, what worse could happen to you than your deputy prime minister stepping down? The second your right-hand person, to your point, throwing him under the bus. Now, again, she didn't go extremely aggressive by any means.
That was more like she threw shade.
But it was, if you look at how she was positioning herself, because you already see MPs within the Liberal Party backing her a little bit right now, saying that she's, I was just mentioning how there was a National Post article saying from one Liberal MP saying she's a intellectual heavyweight. And then you also have other MPs saying that she was the voice of reason amongst the Liberal Party, right? Yeah. Very crazy. Yeah. So
that was involuntary. Wow.
Yeah. So you've got people within the Liberal Party now seemingly aligning themselves with her even as the next Liberal Party leader, and she's trying to make that leap as well, because it's interesting. Apparently, Trudeau gave her the news in a Zoom call. In a Zoom call, he told her that, hey, in a couple days, we're going to reshuffle the cabinet. You can take essentially an honorary position. It wasn't a full title. It was going to be like negotiator for U.S. and Canada relations over the whole Trump thing.
Yeah.
But she wouldn't have a official minister position. So it was more or less just kind of like a nothing burger position.
Yes.
I mean, it'd be of importance, obviously, negotiating with Trump, but her name wouldn't be in any, Liberal cabinet for
it was
instance.
his way of extending an olive branch because he's a fuck up. It's basically what it was.
And so,
in short.
And he apparently also mentioned that he intended on giving Mark Carney her position in that meeting. Well, if you look at it from Chrystia Freeland's perspective in that scenario, you sit there and go, I'm getting pushed out right now. So I either have the chance to just walk away, I can allow this push to happen and I can walk away from all of this, or I can try to position myself in a power position as well and start playing this game backwards.
Yes.
And I think that's exactly what she did, because even saying, at that one point that she said that they've been disagreeing about the best path forward for Canada, and then immediately talked about how they've essentially had disagreements on spending. At one point, she says, eschewing costly political gimmicks, right? So she's accusing him of a lot of their spending being just political gimmicks, which is true. And so that's kind of her positioning herself as being like, again, to that point, I'm the person of reason here. The deficit would have been $80 billion if I wasn't in charge. And so I think she's positioning herself that way. Now, I'm not saying this in support of her. I don't think she's any of those things. She held Trudeau's hand while they froze everyday Canadians' bank accounts.
Yeah, she
over
laughed
the Freedom
about
Convoy.
it. Yeah.
She laughed about it. But yeah, so we'll see. I think this is her trying to essentially rip Trudeau off the ladder. But how successful was it? I don't know. Because to your point, doesn't look like there's anything that can get him to resign at this point. Did you see this listen to this crowd outside of a event that he was just at? This isn't just slight heckling. This is now officially mob behavior towards Trudeau.
You fucking scumbag! You're garbage! You're fucking garbage! Where's my tax money? Where's my tax money? Fuck Trudeau! You fucking piece of shit! Fuck you! Fuck Trudeau! Fuck you! Fuck Trudeau!
That's some third world shit. Let's go.
Well, dude, and that's what I mean is like, there's a difference between, for the last couple of years, we've usually seen in those public scenarios, there's a crowd, but then there's like one or two people that are angry and shouting.
Yeah,
there's
it's like
always
on a golf course when someone hits the drive and someone says something funny.
Yeah.
Now it's everyone.
For anyone just listening, that's mobs of people, and with a full police task force essentially surrounding Trudeau. That's a different energy than we've been seeing.
That's wild.
And so this fact that he can go and give this speech while he is being subjected to that kind of quote unquote greeting from the Canadian public goes to show exactly how delusional this guy is. And that's why I don't think he's stepping down.
No, exactly. He's living in an alternative reality.
It has been an eventful couple of days. It hasn't been easy. And that's why I'm so happy to see you guys.
This is at a liberal
it's hard not to feel
for,
happy when we're like this
supporters.
among liberals, among family, because that's what we really are, a big family. Now, like most families, sometimes we have fights around the holidays. But of course,
Kind of funny.
like most families, we find our way through it.
So smug.
You know,
Oh yeah, he's definitely got a punchable face.
I love this country. I deeply love this party. I love you guys. And love is what families are all about.
So
Yeah,
yes,
he's delusional. It's just exactly. It kind of goes back to exactly what we were saying. Like, there's just no way he's gonna be dragged out kicking and screaming, and he's gonna blame the world because he's a narcissist. It's wild. Just crazy. This guy's been in power for so long. It's like such a broken system. And to your point about Freeland, look. Yeah, I mean, you touched on it, but she's cut from the same cloth. She let this all happen. She's no better. But the nice thing is, if she manages to get control over the Liberal Party, they'll just continue to fall apart. There's no like you want a solid Liberal Party. You need to rebuild it. You need to rebrand it. You need some fresh blood. You need some new people. You need people that actually understand what it was to be liberal 20 years ago, and then go from that point and rebuild a party, because nothing would be better than having two really phenomenal parties in this country fighting out for who should be leading the way.
I agree.
And providing amazing solutions. Like what we're seeing, what we hope to see from the Conservatives, what it looks like we're seeing from the Republicans in the US. But because here's the thing. If the Conservatives and the Republicans are actually able to execute their strategy the way that they're sort of pitching right now, the only way to compete with them is to play their game. So and the thing is they're winning through meritocracy. If you look at what's happening in the States right now, this may be the best government they've had in over 100 years, in around 100 years. In the 30s, they had a big jump of 1930s rather. There was a lot of people that came from the private sector that were very, very capable individuals that helped rebuild the government and help turn it into something that was capable again. And that's exactly what you're seeing in the US. And I'm hoping that's what we see here in Canada. And if that happens, the only way to compete with those people is to bring in your own group of people from the private sector that are highly capable, actually get it, and are trying to help the people, because that is what the party is going to do. So I hope that's where we land. However, Freeland's not a step in the right direction, but that's okay. Maybe they need to fall further first.
Yeah, and I don't even think they necessarily, like, I agree. If there's highly competent people from the private sector that can come over and help our government become more efficient, that's great. But I don't even think they need to have that. They just need to have a basic level of knowledge. We've seen it with Canada's political leaders, up until Poilievre is the first person that actually impresses me as far as even just intellectual ability over the last few years. Aaron O'Toole didn't. Trudeau definitely doesn't. Jagmeet Singh even worse than all three. So as long as they just have a head on their shoulders and they know what they're talking about at like a basic level, I would love to see a Liberal leader or an NDP leader, or hell, if every party's leader was able to represent their position as well as Poilievre is, without just, yes, Poilievre gets into the name calling and the slogans a little bit as well, but he's able to back it up with actual real conversation as well, whereas these other guys aren't.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one part of the equation, but my consideration is more about the infrastructure itself.
Right.
Because that's what's really running the country.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you look at Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy jumping in to start Doge, right? And the value there for me is they're going to hopefully rip apart all the redundancies and bureaucracy within the American government. That's the goal, right? So you do something like that and you have people working in every area of government that is capable and competent, not just a competent leader, because you can have a competent leader and a very fat, bloated government that's just going to be bureaucratic and not move the needle anymore. I think it really is about getting people inside the institutions, and things are, to the region beta paradox, things are bad enough that people are like, we need to make a change.
Yeah,
they are. And I think that's where they're in the States. And I'm hoping that's where we are here. So, as painful as it's been, I'm hoping it turns around to be a net positive, even though it might take another decade for us to feel the positive effects, but at least it's a better world for our kids.
I agree. Well, just before moving on to our next topic here, let's finish this one off with Poilievre's speech. He gave a 5-minute speech, so it is a little bit more lengthy than our typical clips we would play in here. However, It is a stellar speech. Even outside of Canada, it's one of the better political speeches I've heard. So, and it's all off the cuff, you can tell as well. So that's highly impressive. But this is what I think, again, no matter what party it is, this is what leaders should sound like.
When I travel across this country, I consistently meet two types of people. One, those who are a little better off and tell me that, and I'll be very blunt about this, if I don't win, they will leave the country. And they are very numerous. Yes. But I don't worry about them as much. You know who I worry about? The ones who can't leave. The ones who don't know, and if I can just use very blunt language, who tell me I don't know what the hell I'm going to do. I have no idea how I'm going to pay my way. That's right. I met a waitress at a restaurant not long ago, and she came up to me and she grabbed me by the hand and she said, "You have to win." And I said, "Oh, thank you, I appreciate your support." She said, No, it wasn't a compliment. You have to win. And then she told me her story. She told me that she was working one full-time job and two part-time jobs just to pay her bills. As a single woman in her late 50s. And she was tired of working all the time. So she cut everything out of her budget. Every creature comfort, everything she enjoyed about her life, she cut it out so that she could drop one of those part-time jobs. And then one morning, she woke up and she walked outside and her car was gone. And she called her insurance and they said they weren't going to cover the replacement value. So she had to take that job back because she simply cannot live her life without a car. Now you can bet your bottom dollar the guy who stole the car, he was probably out on bail. This was not his first job.
That's right.
Her taxes have gone up. Her heating bill has gone up. Her wages have not gone up. She's scared to go out in the streets in places where they didn't even lock the door not long ago. These are the people we're fighting for. These silly games over here, they're very entertaining. The soap opera that everyone's seized with today, that's all fine. But there are real people whose lives are on the line here, and we have a duty to work for them. And quite frankly, this woman doesn't see me as or any of us as any kind of savior. They see us all as a last hope. In fact, she doesn't want to be saved. She just wants her life back.
Yeah, exactly.
She was taking care of herself just fine before her tax, her heat, her grocery bill went through the roof and her car went missing. She was doing just fine. She was doing everything right. Met another guy at the La Brat Brewery a few days ago, and you can watch the video of me talking with him. He walked up to me and he said, "I have 3 jobs and I can't make it. We're renting. We have no hope. We've given up on ever owning a home. We're renting. We can barely make it." And he said to me, "I feel ashamed when I talk to my kids because they ask me why I'm never around and why we can never have a house. And I feel like a failure." But he didn't fail. He has been failed.
That's right.
He has been robbed of the promise of Canada. It was a very simple promise that if you worked hard, you got a good life. Now, it wasn't fancy or extravagant, but you got a house with a yard where you could have kids playing safely. And you could have a nice dog that you could afford to feed along with the kids. And your kids could play safely in the streets. That was the promise. Now, politicians break promises all the time. But you know what was bad about this promise? This promise didn't belong to this Prime Minister. It wasn't his promise to break. It belonged to all of us. And our purpose is to bring home that promise for that young man, that young father, and that older female worker so that they can once again take back control of their lives, live in a safe country where their hard work earns them a good wage, where their rent and their food is affordable, and where when they go to bed at night, they know that they will be safe throughout their sleep and that they will have their car in their driveway in the morning. A country where people are proud again to fly the flag, where they know the government is a servant and not a master,
right.
where they understand that every day the Commons, this place, works for the common people, not for the ego of one man desperate to cling on to his job.
That's right.
We must remember that we are servants in this place. We have a job to do on behalf of the people who sent us here. Our personal dramas are not important. The dramas that should seize all of our concern and imagination are the daily dramas of the working women and men that build this country. We are in it for them. We're going to give them back control of their lives in the freest country on earth, Canada. Let's bring it home.
But the thing is, though, it's like that's reality. It's reality in this country right now. It's so wild that it's gotten out of control like that in the last 10 years. Because really, when it spiraled, most people didn't even think about politics until probably the last 5 years. Really wasn't even on the radar. They didn't care. Because if it doesn't affect you, you don't really think about it much. You're like, oh, it's liberal government, I pay a little more taxes. Conservative government, pay a little less. That's what most people think. Not really a big deal. But this guy's driven us off a cliff.
I want to live in a country where somebody gives that speech and everyone goes, what is he talking about?
Yeah,
Not,
you're right.
oh, nail on the head.
Like, ooh.
All right, moving on to our next story. We've got Fall Economic Update unveils a $62 billion deficit amidst explosive Liberal Party turmoil. The Canadian Liberal government's Fall Economic Update revealed a $62 billion deficit, over 50% higher than projected, with Freeland previously promising the budget wouldn't go over $40 billion. While overshadowed by political upheaval, the update highlighted Canada's economic struggles, including revised growth forecasts and reduced revenues. Key spending initiatives include $1.3 billion for border security, $2.4 billion for housing, $16.4 billion for Indigenous claims, and $598 million for a stalled gun buyback program. Plans to issue $250 worker checks were also abandoned due to backlash, and delayed by Chrystia Freeland's resignation. The update underscored the Liberals' fiscal mismanagement, fueling calls for Trudeau's resignation and greater financial accountability. So what's your thoughts after analyzing the fall economic statement?
Well, actually, I'd go in a little more on the expense line items, then mention one more thing about revenues. So one additional thing is they reduced the revenue by $5.5 billion. This is over 1% of their expected revenue, which was originally $498 billion. So you can kind of like, in a way, you can add that to the deficit, right? So this kind of, in a sense, goes to 67.5, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's almost 75% higher, the deficit itself, than what they had forecasted. What's interesting, though, is they're bringing more people into the country. They're taxing us more, yet they're still losing revenues. It's because a lot of super high value people are flying out of this country as quickly as possible. So that's one note. The other thing, too, when you look at all these key spending initiatives, I can sort of get behind the border spending. I'm not sure that it will be spent efficiently and that it's the right thing to do. However, it's a really big problem for us. So I can understand spending for the border. You look at the $2.4 billion for housing. What's interesting is their housing initiatives have been abysmal. Doesn't even begin to describe it. Right? It's probably why Sean Fraser, the housing minister, stepped down just before this even came out. And it might have been also because they tried to make him the finance minister. I don't know. But throwing more money at a problem that you haven't been able to fix, that's only getting worse. Like, what are we doing here? The $598 million for the stalled gun buyback program, they've already spent $100 million and they haven't collected a single gun. And what's interesting is the number of guns that they're expected to actually collect is only 30% of those AR type rifles anyway. They're not even going after individuals anymore. So why do you need another $600 million for this? I have no idea. It just doesn't make any sense.
Shipment costs to Ukraine,
apparently. Then there was the $16.4 billion for Indigenous claims. Now, this one was a little hard for me because the money was put aside for future claims for historical grievances. So Indigenous spending, I believe, is currently the highest federal expense. Healthcare overall is the largest tax expense when you consider all government spending. But I think now Indigenous spending is the highest federal expense. But the problem is they still don't all have clean drinking water. And if you took this money and allocated it properly, you could solve that problem. This is absolute nonsense. The problem we have here, though, is there is no system in place to make up accountability. There's just nothing, obviously, because this shit wouldn't happen. You don't have this money to spend, don't spend it. Here's what this is going to do to your political career. Don't spend it. They do it anyway. No accountability. Then Trudeau gives that speech. We're in over our head pretty deep here. And, we do need to elect leaders. We need a more informed electorate. People like you and I need to be more informed and informing more people. That's very, very important so we don't see this happen again. But once we do have a leader in place that understands what's going on, or is at least working for the people, there needs to be stopgap measures that implement some sort of accountability measures. Like, I just don't understand how we do this. There's nothing else, and there's no other job in the world you can have where you can completely blow through everybody's money and there's no accountability. You go to prison for this. The embezzlement. You know what I mean? There's no way this should be acceptable. So yes, it's a mess. The silver lining, I would say, is, well, there's no silver lining. What I'm hoping is that people wake up and then the leaders that come in put some sort of accountability measures in place, because that's what Canadians need.
To your point about the tax revenue dropping, this goes to show how insane they are with their proposed, tax break that they're pushing right now. Okay, we have a spending issue. We're in massive deficits to the point where we're taking on $20 billion more in debt this year than you guys promised. So for an overall of $60 billion more debt. But then, okay, we're going to give a 2 months tax break for GST, right? Well, if you do the math on that, the parliamentary budget officer came out and said this is going to cost taxpayers $2.7 billion, because it's not actually getting a tax break. Because one thing that we need to consider as well with the whole GST issue is that, HST, is that that's split between federal and provincial taxes, right? So only the federal government has said they're giving a tax break, but they can't just get rid of half of a tax on your bills, right? So they have to get rid of the entire thing, which is also the provincial revenue. So what's really happening is the federal government is now subsidizing the the provincial governments for the money that they're not losing out on that. So we're not getting a tax break. They're just not charging you for it today, putting it on the federal deficit credit card and charging you it with interest tomorrow.
Yes.
It's absolutely insane. And so this goes to the whole notion where, because I've seen it many times when I rip apart, say, these kind of policies online, people will go, oh, so now conservatives all of a sudden don't care about cutting taxes. And you go, no, you have to do this properly. When you're in the situation that we're currently in, if you're in it as a individual where you're leaking money, you're in a crippling amount of debt, the very first thing you have to do is stop spending frivolously. And that's exactly what we're seeing with this. No more $600 for federal gun buyback programs that don't work. No more billions of dollars into housing policies that don't work. And then also $16.4 billion for Indigenous claims. To your point, I think you mentioned this yesterday. That's just buying silence. Like 100%. Yes. You brought up the clean water thing, but that's a hey, we're sorry about residential schools. Here's a couple grand or whatever for your reservation. But yeah, don't worry. Don't just forget about the clean water thing for now. It is to your point. It's criminal.
Yes,
it's criminal. And this is where I genuinely don't think that we can move on as a country and start trusting our institutions again until the people that have done the things with these, like what we're seeing with these economic updates, or we'll get into it later with the $102 billion slush fund, until people go to jail for doing something like that, then we can't pretend like these institutions are working.
I totally agree with you. Such a mess.
All right, moving on to our next story. We've got a whistleblower exposes CBSA corruption that endangers Canadian security. Canada's border agency faces severe allegations of corruption and mismanagement, with former CBSA officer Luc Sabrin exposing systemic failures that have allowed terrorists, smugglers, and foreign mafias to exploit vulnerabilities. Sabrin revealed the theft of over 300,000 travel documents, including blank passports, and the approval of visas for high-risk individuals, including a 9/11-linked terror suspect. CBSA's focus on clearing cases quickly over security has fueled criminal activity. Ottawa pledged $1 billion for drones and helicopters to appease U.S. tariff threats, but Sabrin argues real reform must address corruption and mismanagement, Without accountability, Canada's border security remains dangerously compromised. So does the CBSA need to be rebuilt from the ground up?
There is no other option. You and I have chatted with Luke. We have a pretty deep understanding of where that's at. It's rotten to the core, and it makes sense though, right? If you're going to use the country as a landing pad or as like a satellite office for your operation, or even our headquarters in a lot of cases, how do you get everything in and out of the country, and how can you do whatever you want? Well, there's two really important things. One is the border. You have to be able to have control over the border, how it operates, how you can get things in and out with ease. You need it. There's no other way to operate your business. It is how you literally unlock the door to let people in your restaurant. So this is crucial, and we're seeing this. We know that there's cartel, we know there's mafia, we know there's triads, we know there's Iranian terrorists. We know that all of these people have infiltrated and are deeply entrenched inside the CBSA. You and I know that personally. Talk about it some other time with Luke, but we have that information. So, and we also know that the management, the highest level of management, is interconnected with government, right? And that's the other part of the equation. If you're going to operate within this country, it's border and government. Then you can do whatever you want. You're seeing the more powerful groups like the Chinese triads. That's exactly what they've done. So they've got basically free run of the country. So strategically speaking, if you are an organized criminal, this is what you do. And they've done it very effectively because we've let them. We've let them in, right? So when you look at the CBSA, you don't have any other choice but to rebuild from the ground up. Spending $1 billion on drones just gives the same people that are letting all this shit happen drones. Doesn't help you at all. So in my opinion, I don't know what that looks like. I don't know how you weed out the good from the bad. I don't know. I don't have an intimate enough look at the structural, like their operation. But from the outside looking in, from a macro perspective, you have to kneecap it. And I don't know the best strategy other than start from the top down.
I've brought up Andrew Lobachowski many times, who was, yes, the psychiatrist that lived through the communist revolutions and in Nazis in Poland, and how he saw what happened with institutions when those regimes took over, where they would place people into just specific points of authority, positions of authority, that then everything else cascades from, and how that can just completely take over an institution. So while I wouldn't be opposed, say, rebuilding the CBSA from the ground up, at the same time, I think you can just get people into positions of authority in management positions that it's what Trump is doing right now, right? It's going, okay, there's a problem with the HHS. Robert F. Kennedy, that's your problem to deal with, right? And then you give somebody that is genuinely capable enough and understands that issue deep enough and just how corrupt and bad things are to go in there and go, okay, this is the new way that we're running things around here. In fact, that's exactly what America and the Western world in general did with Nazi Germany and Japan after World War II. That's how we brought them into the fold. Because historically, if you were going to war with another nation, you completely crippled them. And if you won the war, you would usually turn that state into a satellite state and just be like, okay, you now owe us this much for your resources. That's what they tried to do after World War I with the Versailles Treaty,
right,
and just throw Germany under the bus and put everything on their back. What ended up happening? They got embarrassed and they came back with a vengeance, right? What they did after World War II that was completely different is they went, okay, who are the Nazi architects? Who are the people that are driving this movement and causing this corruption or this pathological ideology to seep into these institutions? Root out those people like you're taking out a tumor, and the rest of the institutions rebuilt after that. What happened after World War II and that strategy can't be understated as to how big of a miracle it is to go from essentially Japan or Germany and to consider the nation they are today with the economic power that they have. Obviously, they both face their own independent issues today. But I think you could do something like similar to the CBSA, where, yes, you've definitely got people that are in high-level management positions that are working with the cartels and such, or at the very least taking bribes to, hey, if you want to get if you're the cartel and you want to get a soldier into Canada, I know a person I can pay off $100K and get a passport approved tomorrow. Right. So you just need to make an example out of those people, throw them behind bars. Again, just like with the economic statement, go, anybody who had a hand in making things this way will pay a price, and then put the proper people into those positions.
Yeah, I think that's not a bad idea. I think that would go a long way. I mean, the CBSA is about 15,000 public servants total. May take you a while to weed out all the bad, and they may find workarounds and ways to get through it, just because there's so many nooks and crannies in a sense when you have an organization that size. And also we have like the largest open border in the world as well. So it's like you have these other issues, these other things that are going to pop up. But the problem you have, I think, which really needs to be resolved is, again, yes, top-down leadership needs to be replaced, but it's how your governments are working with CBSA. And I understand it's an extension of, but I mean specifically like the person that's in your cabinet minister and how they're working with your prime minister, and then how that person's then leading the CBSA. It's this, like, the communication, from my understanding, between these people is what's driving a lot of the corruption and letting a lot of this kind of happen. So, yeah, I just don't know what it looks like when you wipe out. Like, what am I trying to say? Let me back that up. So my understanding then is, like, it's everything from your cabinet minister into the people that are running the CBSA, right? And if you think about 15,000 employees, and then you think about a structure, and you start going, okay, there's one person at the top, then you've got 10 below them, 100 below them, say 1,000 below them. How many holes are there in there? How many chinks are there in this armor? Do you have to replace the guy at the top? Sure. Do you have to replace all 10 people below him and all 100 people below them as well? And then what does the next 1,000 look like? So this is where it gets rocky, because there is actually an operation. So it may be that corrupt. That is my concern. I can
probably actually answer that. So the number that Lobachowski found when ideologues in these regimes take over these institutions, somebody gets put into a position of authority, and then the number was 6 to 12% was consistent of people that were beneath them that would follow the dictates and then act as a pressure cooker for the other, like 80 to or 95% almost, depending. And then, so if you take that number of 1 to 10 to 1,000, you've probably got 6 to 12% at each of those levels.
I think so go ahead.
So you've got, okay, let's just easy round number. You've got 10%. So you got to get the head changed. And then you've probably got 1 or 2 of those 10 people that really need to get changed below them. And then below them, you've probably got 10 to 20 out of the 100 that you really need to get out of those positions. And I think you could do it through Bukele style corruption investigations.
Everybody sit down. You're all on the hot seat.
Everybody in a management position here is in a hot seat.
Yeah.
One instance of corruption, you're gone.
Yeah. See, my perspective, and again, it's only a theory because I don't know, but I would imagine you have more darkness at the top. So I would imagine number one's got to go. I imagine half of the second layer's got to go. And I would say 1, and then 5 of the 10, and then maybe 40 of the 100. And then I think the 6 to 12% would overall work. And I think it would minimize as you work your way out as well. Because when you need compliance from people, when you're doing things like that, they need to be closer to you. So I think the further they are away from the top, the harder it is to convince them as well. So yeah, it's interesting. Anyway, I mean, we'll see what they can do. We'll see what the conservatives can do ultimately when they get in power, because this is one of the most important things. And it's really our first line of defense as Canadians, right? Like our military, whatever. But I mean, really the first line is like our border, right? So we'll see what they do.
Well, and just to tie this together before moving on, Dominic LeBlanc, who was just appointed the finance minister after nobody wanted the job, so he's now in charge of Canada's federal budget. His past position was public safety minister, in charge of overlooking the CBSA, the RCMP, and quote unquote public safety, right? So all of these border issues that we're talking about, or like CBSA corruption, he's been in charge of overlooking that for the last 4 years. Now he's in charge of our deficit.
Yeah, things are good. Things are good.
All right, moving on. We've got Canada's $102 billion slush fund, a black hole of corruption. An anonymous ex-user uncovered a $102 billion slush fund labeled Other Transfer Payments, revealing taxpayer money funneled into corrupt institutions and ideological projects. Verified on government websites, the fund includes $900 million annually to the UN, $44 million for a Luxembourg climate initiative, $10 million for UK abortion services, and $186 million for vague women's programs. Millions also support foreign banks, DEI initiatives, and international police forces, while Canadians face inflation, rising crime, and failing healthcare at home. Critics argue that this isn't mismanagement, but betrayal, with billions wasted on global activism while Canadians struggle with poverty and economic decline. So, is the Trudeau government governing or looting?
Well, I can show you a real easy way to save $102 billion.
Well, I should add some nuance here to the fact that I did go through a large portion. I'd scrolled through it's really hard. You open up this fund, your computer almost crashes. Like, that's how large this is. When you do like the hardcore scroll and you're trying to get to the bottom of the thing, doesn't make a dent in this page. That's how many things there are. However, there is certain portions of this fund that do make sense. Some of it was healthcare funding, whatever, that kind of thing. But you get into these points where you just go, oh, that's $200 million of spending on forcing media companies to implement DEI initiatives. And it's like, so you might get 5 spending items that you're like, okay, that makes sense. But then you get one every other 5 that you're like, what the fuck is this?
I don't know, man. Every time I see this kind of stuff, I go, 80% of government spending is corrupt,
right,
mismanaged, or bureaucratic nonsense, basically. So I would say 80 billion is a complete waste. But what's interesting is then the other 20% that went to programs you agree with, 80% of that was still wasted as well. Like, it was, right? So, like, this is just ridiculous, man. It's so hard for me because here's what I'm seeing. The gravy train's on its way out. That's what I'm seeing, right? It's kind of like, that saying, make hay while the sun shines. Sun has been shining for a long time in the government, right? They've been able to take this money, do whatever they want. $102 billion slush fund. The federal budget in 2014, when Trudeau got in, was $290 billion. This $102 billion, now it's over $500 billion. He's just basically taken this. He's like, here, boys and girls, do whatever the hell you want. That's what this looks like. But I imagine people are taking advantage of him because he's a fucking moron. Like honestly, he does not know what he's doing. And when you're that much of a narcissist, you refuse to identify the problems you've made and how you're going to fix things. And, I don't want to give Trump too much credit because as an individual, I still have some questions about him. But the improvements he's made from round 1 to round 2 are very significant. And you can see from the people he's appointing and putting in as a part of his team, even the things he's saying, like, it's almost like he matured in his 70s, to be quite honest with you. But what that tells me is, despite all the rhetoric, there's a bit of humility there because he's understood, here's why I went wrong, but he's a businessman. And people can shit on him because his dad gave him a bunch of money, but he turned it into a hell of a lot more. So to get to that point, yes, there is some narcissism, but there is also an understanding of, hey, I know where I'm making my mistakes and I can improve these things. However you reconcile that personally, I don't really care. Trudeau's not even willing to do that. So they basically go, we got an idiot running this country. And he's a narcissistic psychopath who's not willing to take responsibility for anything. And his only policy is spend more money. Sun is shining, ladies and gentlemen. Let's get in there. And they know because they're like, well, now the country's been driven off a cliff. Anybody that understands anything about economics knows exactly what's happening in this country right now. So if you're on the inside and you have this opportunity to extrapolate or pull this money out before the gravy train leaves the station, of course you're going to do it. That's exactly what's happening here. He's being taken advantage of, and he's too much of a narcissist to just put his foot down and say, hey, we got to stop this spending because he doesn't want to look like he's made a mistake. But this is all going to come to an end when we have a new government. I think they're going to cut the federal budget by probably $100 billion or more. It just might take a year or two because Poilievre's got to get in there and see what kind of mess it is.
Yeah, well, there's easy things to cut, right? Like, again, not that this one program cut would make a huge difference, but there's plenty of it like this where why are we giving $10 million to the UK for abortion services?
It's insane.
Or this one is actually a big dent. $900 million annually to the UN. Why?
For what?
So that they can come up with agendas that we have to follow that don't work to our benefit.
And then we don't even follow them if we don't like them anyway. Basically, to me, that's an access fee. That's like Trudeau going, I need a job after this. Here you go. That's all I'm saying. Yeah. Let's see how many liberal cucks go work for the UN after this is done.
Probably a lot. You saw it with Mark Rutte, right? The Netherlands Prime Minister. He got ousted, and then now he's the NATO guy. It's like, all right, yeah. So that's exactly what you see. Although there might actually be so much international hatred against Trudeau that he can't even go be put in one of those institutions.
Oh, he'll be a little bitch boy for a couple years and just bring everybody coffee.
Yeah, but think about how insane it is that we've got a government who sits around and looks at things like national defense spending and goes, yeah, we can't hit our military budgets. We don't have the money for it. Again, what are you talking about? Like $186 million for vague women's programs that go towards like corrupt regimes in Africa to be like, hey, you should treat your women better in Ethiopia. And then meanwhile, they're doing the worst human rights abuses to these women on the planet.
I think I should like to mention they also send that kind of money to the Taliban for the same thing.
Yeah.
Nice one, guys.
Yeah. Well, we saw you did the rant on the property spending, right? It's like, okay.
Oh, that frustrated me.
Actually, this is a great idea because again, yes, it's great to shit on these people and illuminate how bad things have gotten, but to give a positive path forward, I think it was Norway. Yes, Norway. They've got a national sovereign fund is what they call it. This is actually a really cool idea. So they've essentially got an index fund that is managed by the government and it uses public funds into it. So they take profits that they make from natural resources. They take that and they put it into a fund that then is an investment. So what they can do in a scenario where, let's say, you hit a 2008 financial crisis or COVID, that when those things happen, you can sell off your profits from the fund and use those to fund the projects that you need and the relief that you need so that you don't need to put it on a federal credit card. And then when times are good, you're funneling more money into the fund so that it accrues more interest that you have when times are bad.
Oh, you mean basic economics?
Yes.
Like everybody else runs their life?
Yes.
Cool. Yeah, that's a good idea. No shit.
It's a $1.4 trillion sovereign wealth fund. Like this fund is essentially pushing their nation forward in a large way.
Yeah,
there's zero reason we can't do that here.
Yeah, like, well, no, I joke because I joke sarcastically because it's so obvious. It's like however you talk to your parents, it's like, how do you guys make your money? Oh, well, we earn money from here, we invest it here, and we save for a rainy day. And if we need something, we pull it out. No problem.
Mm-hmm.
That's how this works. And we diversify in case something falls apart. Oh, you don't say. And our government's just like, give me all your money, I'm going to burn it. All right, man. Cool strategy, bro.
It is weird that so many people, and even just people in general, like your average Canadian, they think all of a sudden economic principles are different when it's the government involved.
Because they've convinced us and there's no accountability.
Like how many times do you hear, oh, it's free healthcare or it's free
that
this? Or
pisses me right
the
off.
Vaccine
I try to explain that to people.
The vaccine is free. You're like, none of this is
No.
It's
No.
Literally free in this world does not exist. There's nothing for free.
And I think people are like this idea of universal. I don't want to go too far into the healthcare thing, but they love the idea of universal healthcare. But like ours costs us more than it does. We pay more per capita than they do in the United States for healthcare, and ours is significantly worse. We have the worst primary care of all like 10 out of 10, profitable nations. So it's just ridiculous.
Mm-hmm. All right, moving on. We've got COVID vaccine producers shared over 1 million adverse effects reports with Health Canada. Health Canada received over 1 million serious adverse events, or SAE, reports related to COVID-19 vaccines, including 600,000 from Pfizer, yet failed to make this information accessible to the public, despite legal obligations under the Food and Drug Act to report SAEs within 15 days. Internal inefficiencies and alleged suppression hindered transparency. Experts, including Sean Buckley, revealed systemic barriers to reporting and testimony of rejected or ignored reports from physicians. The National Citizens Inquiry described deliberate obstruction of SAE data, undermining public trust. Critics argue this suppression prioritized narratives over safety, raising serious concerns about accountability and public health protection. So, what should be the penalties for the public health officials hiding adverse effects from the public while coercing them into taking these experimental pharmaceutical products?
This is challenging when you sort of unravel this a little bit, right? Because there's a couple things that these people should be doing for us. First of all, the whole idea of adverse event reporting is to stop something from happening before it does. We get international reports of 1 million adverse events, some here, some international, saying, hey, these things are dangerous, directly from the pharma companies. That's what this is, right? If this were any other drugs, they'd be like, nope, we're not taking it. So the whole idea of this adverse event reporting system is to stop us from actually doing it. Instead, they doubled down. So it works directly against the entire purpose of what it's supposed to do. This is very, very evil, right? Because you know that the only reason they're doing it is for profit. This is insane. What's harder for me then moving on is we have this thing where we're supposed to have give informed consent. So we all knew that we weren't getting all the information around these vaccines. Some of us, like myself specifically, like I was pretty dialed into understanding. I understood the mechanism, how the delivery mechanisms worked and everything. Like I was like, I got to figure this out. Very, very few people. I think I knew at the time, just because you forget things, I would suggest that I knew more than high 90% of doctors in the world that were dealing with these things. I just did. I was doing so much research and I still couldn't get all the answers. But then you have shit like this. So even if you told me everything, even if I was able to unpack everything I knew and then go talk to even more intelligent and more tapped doctors that are actually tapped in, they still wouldn't be able to tell you this because this was never done at scale. So this is completely criminal. There's no way that this should have happened without every single one of these people being thrown in jail indefinitely. This is insane. And one thing I'll point out about this that I remember from doing the rant on this was there was one doctor specifically that had 56 adverse events to report in Canada. And it wasn't even a long period of time, 56 reports. They only allowed 6 to be submitted, right? So you're looking at 10%. So we don't actually know how bad this was, but if that is a consistent marker they used and other regulatory agencies were doing the exact same thing, then this million was 10 million. And when you look at the adverse events at scale around the world, you pretty much have to multiply it by 10 because the roadblocks that they put in the way in even reporting this information. This is just criminal. This is wild. I don't know. It upsets me, this one.
Interesting. I'm going to go a little bit more zoom out of Canada here. Now, who knows? Maybe it's all just Russian play to try to undermine our institutions. That's definitely a real possibility. So take this with a grain of salt. But General Igor Kirillov, head of Russia's Chemical and Biological Defense Forces, was recently assassinated in Moscow. He has spent the last year or so investigating US-backed biolabs and is accusing the US of using pathogens in order to profit off of the cure and saying that this might have been intentional. Again, he was assassinated recently after going on a crusade. One of the things that he points out as well is that he said that Russia has submitted the irrefutable evidence many times to the UN about this, and nothing. Crickets, obviously. Now,
yeah, because we pay the UN $900 million to shut up and do what we want them to do.
Exactly. So, who knows? Again, grain of salt. Maybe this is Russia just trying to undermine our institutions and get us to essentially tear ourselves apart. That's a real possibility. It would be a smart strategy on their end. However, you also put those allegations next to the things that we've known. Yeah. And you go, it's kind of, I don't know, 1 + 1 is looking like 2 here a little.
Anecdotally, I would say the same thing. Anecdotally, of course. Mm-hmm. I don't have enough data, but it looks like a duck quacks like a duck. You bring a vaccine to market in a year, apparently something you've been working on for all this time that you scale up to the tune of billions of doses like this, and you convince everybody it's the right thing to do. It's almost like you had your propaganda ready to go. And now you're implementing all these new tools like the Pandemic Preparedness Act to plug those holes because you realize people like you and I were able to basically speak out and slow them down. Yeah. I think I have a hard time not agreeing.
All right, last story for the day. We've got Milei achieves Argentina's first budget surplus in over a century. Poilievre must follow his lead. Argentinian President Javier Milei achieved the country's first balanced budget in over a century, transforming a deficit-ridden economy through bold reforms. He eliminated unproductive bureaucrats, cut red tape, and closed ineffective agencies, breaking the cycle of debt and inflation. Milei's fiscal discipline has drawn global attention, influencing figures like Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy, who aim to streamline U.S. government spending under Trump's Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE. Canada's conservative leader, Pierre, could adopt Milei's strategies to address rising debt and inflation caused by Trudeau's policies. Inspired by Hayek's warnings, Milei's success demonstrates the power of disciplined government. Do you think Poilievre will follow Milei and Musk's lead?
I think he will try to do something similar. Like there's this sort of osmosis thing that happens with good ideas. And the reason I know that is because there was a Western liberal rule. Everybody was doing the same thing in lockstep.
Right.
What you're seeing in the States and Canada and the UK and Australia and New Zealand, all the same. It's like they had an agenda. And I think some of it was definitely programmed from organizations like the UN. And a lot of it was also just osmosis. You know what I mean? Like they see how this is working and they do the same thing, primarily to maintain power in that case. But you're going to see the same thing here. Oh, this is the first time in 100 years is insane. So they're going to go, hey, you can't really disagree with this libertarian strategy. You just can't. It works. So what do you want? You want what's best for the country? And what's interesting right now in Canada and the United States is that is the entire platform of the incoming parties. Hey, we're going to fix this mess and do what's right for the people. Well, this is what works. With Pierre Poilievre, I know one of his financial mentors personally, and he runs a massive financial fund. He's a very, very sharp guy. So I know that he's got good understanding and he does understand sort of, the corporate finance world. He gets it. So I wouldn't be surprised to see him implement these things. I think the only difference is going to be how far can he go, right? So in Argentina, their Overton window's wide open because there's so much chaos. There was so much chaos and corruption, right? And then when you go to the States is actually much wider than Canada's, right? And the reason is because the two political parties are polarized. So that creates a very wide window of acceptable speech, where Canada's is a little more narrow. And the reason I'm using this as an example is it's not directly the Overton window, but it kind of is. Because it's how flexible or how open are Canadians to radical change. Now, we all know we need it. So I think Canada's has gotten wider and it's moving in the right direction. But I don't think that they would allow the radical strategy they've had in Argentina. And the reason I say this is because ultimately what Milei did was best for the country and best for the significant majority of the country. However, there are more people, that were living on the street. There are some poverty issues. There are people that had to deal with inflation issues and this, that. So that was the claim of all these things. And you're going to see sort of a similar situation here if they go too radical. We're going to cut all these programs. What do you do with all the people in the social programs? You know what I mean? We can reduce the size of government and reduce the departments. But if you look at where the spending's going, yes, a lot of it's going to the government organization itself, which needs to be reduced. But if these programs are covering social programs, what are they paying for? How much is actually going to these programs? It still is the lion's share going out the door, not staying internally within the government, right? To pay salaries and such. That's an easy reduction. So if he does this radical change like he did down there, what happens to the programs that a lot of people are now depending on only because of a terrible liberal government, like the number of people using food banks, the number of people on social support. So I don't think he can do quite the same thing, but he can do our version of it, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And well, the way I look at it is there would be a list of priorities. And before you get to, say, social spending cuts, you can cut so much before you even need to get to programs like that. For instance, even what we just saw on the recent fall economic update, $16.4 billion for future historical grievances to Indigenous people. Sorry, the people of today don't need to pay other people of today for things that somebody of yesterday did to things somebody of yesterday.
Especially because they've already got one of the most significant federal budgets as it is.
Zero chance. And I do so you can just cut things like that. However, it needs to be a backbone because actually, you know what? It wouldn't even be a thing because you cut the media's funding before then. Because I was going to say, if you cut a program like that, you're going to have the media attack you for being anti-Indigenous or whatever. But if you've defunded the media before that, then
priorities.
There you go. Because yes, there is no reason that the CBC should be funded. Actually, we even just saw, right, that they need $500 million more in funding so that their annual revenue from the taxpayer would be $2 billion,
which is
what they would need to continue going. You go, no, just you're done. You're done. Let it go.
That's an easy one.
Let it go.
See ya.
And this ties into actually both CBC and government spending. Poilievre was asked a question just yesterday, I believe, about by a CBC reporter about government spending, and he shredded them, and it's so great.
The government is coming out with a $1.3 billion plan to address border security. Do you think that's enough to stop Trump's tariffs? And if it was up to you, how much specifically would you spend on border security? What number would you put on it?
Well, you ask a classically CBC question.
which is how much money can you spend on a problem? Well, that's the wrong question. That's exactly the question Trudeau has been asking for 9 years. It's the reason he's doubled our debt while making everything worse. For example, he spent $80 billion on housing affordability. Well, how'd that work? He doubled housing costs. He spent $60 million on his gun confiscation. 0 guns. He spent millions on a school food program that hasn't served a single solitary meal. So we should not judge a program based on how expensive we can make it. We should judge it by what it can do. How many helicopters? How many drones? How many boots on the ground? That's the question I will be asking when I'm Prime Minister. And how do we deliver it for the lowest possible price to taxpayers? Wouldn't it be nice if we had a Prime Minister who said, we secured the borders, we put more boots on the ground, we stopped tons and tons of fentanyl from traveling back and forth, we arrested the terrorists, we shut down the organized crime, we reduced gun crime, and by the way, we did it with less tax dollars. That's how our mentality has to change. We have to stop judging politicians by how expensive they can make things and start judging them by the results they get. You went into a restaurant and had a terrible experience. The food was awful. You got food poisoning. The service was bad. You wouldn't walk out and say, but it was great because it cost me $1,000. And because it's the most expensive restaurant around, it must be the best. No, we judge the meal by the food on the plate and the service that delivered it. That's how I'm going to run a common sense conservative government.
He's on fire lately.
It's a great answer. But one thing that I've thought about as well is if he was to take Milei's approach, he would have to do it with as much speed as Milei did. You would have to get in. Let's say he gets his best case scenario. He gets a complete majority to the point where the House is his.
Yeah.
All right. Still has to deal with Trudeau's Senate because Trudeau has stacked the Senate. However, the House is his. He could start just doing everything radically within his power to change the current approach. And I think the way that I would look at what Milei did in Argentina from an economic point, because you pointed out how, say, poverty went up after his chainsawing. It's very similar to a surgery. If you've got a tumor, the answer is to get in and do a quick surgery, take the tumor out, and yes, you might be bedridden for a week after that. That's your 10% increase in poverty that we saw down in Argentina. Now, meanwhile, it went from 30 to 40%. It was already out of control.
Oh, yeah. I agree with his measures. I'm just saying in Canada, we don't really accept that as the fallout.
Right. I just wanted to make it clear because some people frame it. Whenever you speak highly of Milei, you inevitably get a few people chirping about the poverty thing. And it's like, it was out of control and it got slightly worse short term.
Yes, agreed.
And so it's very similar to a surgery where it's like, yes, you might go in to get that tumor removed and you might actually feel worse for the week following the surgery while you're recovering from the surgery.
Yes, but
than you were right before it. However, long-term health, you've now gotten rid of a tumor that is killing you in the long term. That is exactly how these economic reforms work. And so I think, who knows? If he gets his house, then maybe we're fucked from a Senate perspective that he can't get what he wants to get done through the Senate. But we'll see. At that point, I hope he at least gives it a good run.
I agree. I also think that there'd be a lot of social pressure on the Senate because if you're not doing what the people want, I mean, again, I go back to this thing. I do not think our senators should be appointed. I think that's criminal. Yeah. I think we should have staggered elections. I think they should be in 2027. And I think everybody's role should be, you're sitting, but you can be ousted.
Right.
So you have to run. Sorry, you got to run a campaign. That's it. Like, I think everybody should be elected. The reason I say staggered is because you give everybody a couple of years rather, to see what it's like under a conservative government and see how you feel. And then from that point forward, they are elected. I don't care. We're done with this. This is so stupid in a democracy that we have a governing body like that can stifle all of our progress. And they've all been appointed by a tyrannical idiot. Mm-hmm. So for me, that could be a very, very big issue. We'll see how that plays out. I agree with your sentiment. He's got to move quickly. And I also agree with your strategy of build a list of priorities and do it in a linear path that allows you to make progress without hurting social programs first, just because you don't necessarily want the fallout. So
agreed. All right, before we get out of here, don't forget to head over to our Substack where you can subscribe and support the show. It helps keep this engine moving, and we greatly appreciate anyone who does so, even if you are tight on cash, because again, when we talk about the topics we do, we understand the position that everyone is in. However, even if you can't support the show, you can still sign up for our newsletter, which goes out for free 5 days a week. So head on over there and subscribe to that. All right, we'll catch you next time.
bye, everybody.